I don't know. I guess it depends on which perspective you're coming from at any given time, because I think there's a lot of sort of ambivalence about the Freedom Act, which was essentially arguably reforming and certainly reauthorizing certain provisions of the Patriot Act this week. Some people are calling it a victory for Rand Paul. Some people are calling it a loss for Mitch McConnell. And like I say, there's a lot of ambivalence. You sort of zeroed in this week on the one thing that is sort of, I think, unambiguous that came out of this in terms of Edward Snowden.
Right. I mean, this doesn't happen without him. This doesn't happen without him and what he did. The conversation not only doesn't change, it doesn't take place. And I think I think the best thing to come out of this is that how we talk about these issues has changed. And there's a legitimate political constituency for reining in all of the stuff we did out of fear after the 9/11 attacks. How long that consensus will last, considering I think the Republicans are going to run a very hawkish primary campaign, I have no idea. But right at this moment in time, there is a constituency in the other direction.
I mean, if you were to graph it, like the waxing and waning of that constituency, how would it go? Because it is sort of amazing to me to think about the sort of the regime that we have now. I don't know that necessarily there's, obviously there's two components of this. One is, I guess there's more than that, but one is that our technology over the past 15 years has happened to made it much, much easier and much more efficient for the NSA, for the FBI, et cetera, these agencies to spy on us. Simultaneously, their authority has been expanded, but it really, in many of these instances, they have the authority, just not the sort of the physical capacity to be as surveil-y as they have become. A lot of what's happening now seems like in 1999, let's say, would have been unthinkable, right? I just wonder, is it waxing? Is it waning? Is this just a function of some people found it opportunistic at this time in the sort of the election cycle? What's going on?
I think it's all of those things. I think that almost every institution of the country is still trying to catch up with the communications revolution the last 20 years. Certainly newspapers are. I think government is. I think politics are. And I think, I think that the technology has raced ahead of the Bill of Rights in a lot of ways, and this was one of them. And I think at this point there is a little bit of a pushback coming, and I think that's all to the good.
And what happens with Snowden now? I mean,
I don't know. I think he stays in Moscow.
I mean, it seems to me, it's so hard to reconcile the idea that we just voted. Well, not just that we just had a vote where you've reformed part of the Patriot Act. You have a court decision a month ago, maybe a little bit less, saying that, the NSA was actually interpreting this in an illegal fashion, or the government was interpreting what Congress passed in an illegal fashion. And simultaneously, Edward Snowden is a criminal as opposed to a whistleblower.
Well, I mean, it all depends on on the administration. That's whether or not they'll prosecute him when he comes home. And apparently they're still dead set on it. I think the president as much as it sounds weird, I think the president's got to walk a very fine line with the intelligence community. And I think this is bringing him home and pardoning him, I think, would be a bridge too far.
So when you talk about he's got to walk a line, extrapolate that. When you talk, he's got to walk a line with the intelligence.
I think it's better for the president to have the surveillance community or the intelligence community on his side than not have it on his side. They can do a lot of damage, I would think, sub rosa, especially to a lame duck. So I don't think politically within the executive branch, it's tenable for him to double back now and say, okay, the court has said this and the Congress has done that, so let's bring him home and pardon him and all will be well. I just don't think that's going to happen.
Is there any? I mean, is there any way that this guy can come back? Because
not without being prosecuted at the moment.
But I'm saying, like, even all right. So it's President Clinton, President. I guess maybe.
With the change in administration, sure. I mean, it's not going to happen under any of the Republicans. That's for sure.
Maybe President Sanders or maybe President Chafee, I guess, based upon his announcement. Well, we'll talk about President Chafee because I guess obviously that concept I was also not terribly impressed. But is there nothing? I mean, where's like Ron Wyden to read some of this stuff into the record, or where is it? Just seems sort of shocking to me that Snowden's whistleblowing is implicit in all of these conversations. But nobody who's engaged in these conversations, at least nobody with any type of official capacity, nobody with any type of authority, explicitly states like, hey, the only reason why we're talking about this and the only reason why that there's a debate about whether we reform or whether there's a court case or what it is because of what this guy did. And that makes it almost, how could you say that's not whistleblowing?
Well, no, I mean, if you want a kind of a stretch of a historical parallel, Ed Snowden is kind of like the John Brown of this. John Brown's hanging John Brown after the raid on Harper's Ferry was, applauded by the country until the war started, and at which point, people decided that we weren't going to talk about John Brown, but we were going to talk about every issue he brought to the front. I think, Edward Snowden he's the firebell in the night, basically. But is he ever going to get credit for that from his own government? I'm not seeing it at the moment.
I mean,
whether that's right or wrong, I'm just not seeing it.
I mean, it's fascinating. On one hand, I can understand, like, okay, because ultimately, look, John Brown is celebrated as an important abolitionist, right? I mean, he and I can understand you've just hung him, and you're not going to talk about him, right? We're not going to talk about that. It's a mistake we can't go backwards on. But it's not like the book is closed on Edward Snowden because he keeps showing up, right? I mean, it's not
he's very visible.
Right. I mean, that's what's so weird about it to me is that it's like he's sitting in the room and everybody's having this conversation like he's not there.
Yeah. It's a fascinating place in history to be. And I guess we all benefit from what he's doing, except a lot of us are terrible ingrates about it.
I mean, is there a parallel? Because even, I guess, you mentioned John Brown, but that guy, he was dead. And so he's dead and you move forward. You don't talk about him because that's embarrassing to people. But it just seems to be the way even the media, and I remember seeing this. I don't want to get too off on too much of a tangent, but I remember, back in, I guess it was 2011 or so, when the big the Chelsea Manning leaks happened through WikiLeaks, and people would say, like, there's nothing new here. We'd hear this over and over again for the media. There was a breach, but there's nothing new. And then literally for the next year, every time I would go in to do some type of hit on TV, it was based on a story that broke because it included documents from this WikiLeaks dump. But it was never pointed to that WikiLeaks dump, right? So it just sort of went down. It didn't even go down the memory hole. It was like it was in a parallel track. We have the memory hole, and we're still discussing what we supposedly forgot where it came from. Right.
That's a remarkable phenomenon in these. I mean, there's so much ambivalence within the media toward how this information came to our attention that it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist within the context of the consequences that it's brought. As you pointed out, you didn't hear Edward Snowden's name in the debate over the USA Freedom Act.
And none of that
which would not have occurred had he not done what he did.
It's just a very strange. It's just a very strange dynamic, and I don't recall another time when I don't ever recall anything quite like it. I mean, I guess the WikiLeaks, was sort of a similar situation where we're going to pretend like we're going to build all these stories around this, and we're going to pretend like it's news and it's important and we're informing the public, but we're still going to condemn the person who basically brought all this to you.
No, it's completely different, for example, from the Pentagon Papers.
Right.
Where they were always sourced to Daniel Ellsberg. You know who the guy was. And anything we learned, subsequently learned from the Pentagon Papers, we learned because of Daniel Ellsberg. And that would be, that was always in, the second or third paragraph of any story that was prompted by the Pentagon Papers. Edward Snowden's name doesn't appear in any stories prompted by these. I mean, some of them it does. But very, very far down, and certainly not within the halls of power.
What do you think accounts for that? I mean, was there a lesson learned, or was there just something fundamentally different in society, or is it just that?
I think there's a reluctance on the part of elected politicians to give him credit for anything because they're afraid of getting traitor baited in the next primary or in the next general election.
Right.
That's the simplest answer I have.
Do you think that there seems to be a far less passion about this stuff than, let's say, the Pentagon Papers? I mean, I know that
the Pentagon Papers were historical, and a lot of it confirmed what people already suspected. This was about stuff that was going on now, and of course, it engaged the kind of intelligence community priesthood with its secret rites and its secret rituals. So that was, there was a substantial amount of pushback. I mean, even Richard Nixon realized on the Watergate tapes that the Pentagon Papers were a lot more damaging to the reputations of Kennedy and Johnson than they were to Nixon. Nixon was just ticked that they got leaked.
Right.
But in one of the tapes, he says quite plainly to Kissinger, look, this makes Kennedy and Johnson look bad. So I think the fact that it was ongoing, it makes a bit of a difference. And then, if you're on the other side, you can play the you're endangering people's lives, card.
Right. Do you think, I don't know if you read Rick Perlstein's last...
no, not the newest one, no.
But, the thing that really stuck with me was the period of time, I guess, in the... was it in the 70s now? Was it in 75? Yeah, 75, I guess it was. There was something like 85. I may be getting my year off or two. But, he points out there was like 85, terrorist attacks in the United States. And that, I think it was in 75, like 20 people died at LaGuardia Airport from a bomb in the in the luggage area. And that, our response at that time was not to lock everything down. Like we're a much more frightened society these days, it seems like.
I agree with that, and that's been the case for at least for 14 years now. And I think that I think there's a lot of elements to that, and I mean the instant communication, the fact that the people who gin up terror are a lot better at their jobs than the people who go out and report whether or not the thing is a serious threat or not. I mean, there's a lot of that, but I think we are more scared, and I think we've had 30 years of people telling us that our government can't do anything.
Right.
So I mean that's also a factor.
And I guess to a certain extent, everybody watched that second plane go into the town. Not everybody,
yeah,
but
and then
people experienced it in a way that they didn't experience these things before.
Yeah, and then anthrax.
Right.
That sort of gets lost to history. But that was the second stage of the thing. Nobody, and people are still unclear as to what happened there. But that was the second thing that came by. But people were just in a blind panic in 2001.
I haven't dug.
They passed the Patriot Act without ever reading it.
Right. I haven't dug into it, but apparently the CIA has been sending around, or the Defense Department has been sending around live anthrax for the past decade.
I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on there. Whether it's some sort of premium you get in the mail or something.
That's right. That's right. Instead of a tax rebate,
it's like the old Columbia Records look.
There you go.
You can get 5 loathsome diseases free as long as you buy 9 in the next year.
I always thought it was for a penny.
It was for a penny, actually.
It was for a penny. I remember that was the big thing, right? You do it.
Yeah, you'd get like 12 albums, and then you'd have to buy like awful ones for the rest of the year.
Exactly. All of a sudden, it becomes much more narrow, your choices.